want to chat all things, your rights at work today. A lot of men and women have been asked to take pay cuts. A lot of people have been laid off. What are some of the trends that you're seeing? You run a feminist-focused law firm. What are some of the trends that you've seen during this Corona time?
Well, we're seeing, there's sort of two different people in sort of a couple different buckets of situations. People who are essential workers are worried about having to go into work, worrying about the safety of their workplace. And then, of course, it's a different set of issues for people who are able to work remotely but might be afraid of their jobs, of their job security. And then, of course, we're getting tons of calls from people who unfortunately have already been laid off or furloughed. So I think, in terms of people being afraid of their job security during a pregnancy, we're getting a lot of calls. COVID-19, I think, is everyone's showing their true colors. We see it with our politicians also, where we see employers who are kind of using it as an excuse to engage in sort of the discriminatory conduct that they didn't feel free to do before, and saying, we're laying only you off, but it has nothing to do with the fact that, you're on maternity leave. It's just a business decision. Oh, COVID, coronavirus. And that they think it's this magic amulet. So, of course, that's where we come in. But it's always better to prevent issues before they happen. I usually tell people that legal rights are largely academic, in that if an employer takes an action against you that's illegal, you're still screwed. It just means you can come back later and file a lawsuit and get a settlement down the road. But if you can engage your employer politically, and this is sort of, Meggie, where your expertise more comes in, with using your negotiating skills, you can prevent issues from happening. And so then the question becomes kind of how to present your legal rights in a way that will protect them, but also not sort of isolate you or damage kind of your social standing, because a lot of people don't want to be too forthright or too forthcoming and say, rah, 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 hell no, we won't go, because they don't want to suffer the social repercussions of their workplace, understandably. So I think the best thing to do is, as always, to figure out ways to present your case in a way that is collaborative and compelling, especially if you have a decent employer. And if you have a shitty jerk employer, then, figuring out how to appeal to their egos or their fear in a way that's not too overt.
That's interesting to me, this idea of appealing to their ego or their fear. Can you just dive in? Because I agree with you and I totally know what you're getting at. For people who don't, can you just dive into that a little more? That's really interesting to me.
Ultimately, right now, but as always, we're dealing with human beings, and everyone's feeling very vulnerable right now. I'm an employment discrimination attorney, but I'm also an employer. And so I can appreciate the employer situation right now, where we're really worried too. And we don't, who can we trust? Who can we count on? Who's going to be there? Can we make ends meet? All of those things. But I think, with respect to, as I mentioned, the jerks and the egos in the context of like the jerk employers, where, good employers want to do the right thing. And so you can approach things collaboratively from the standpoint of, I'm so glad that you're prepared to do the right thing and we can all do the right thing together. But where you have, maybe a really big corporation who doesn't really care about you, or, just a less scrupulous company, of which there are tons, you'll get further by figuring out how to not be too overtly threatening. In a way, you want them to feel in control and in charge, but you need to educate them. And they might not realize that they can't use this as an excuse for whatever bad behavior they wanted to engage in. They think they can get away with it. And so it's a question of educating them.
You run a law firm that is an employment law firm. You have a feminist focus. You deal with a lot of men and women, but particularly a focus on women. Mm-hmm. I know you can't speak specifically about cases, but what are some of the issues that you've observed that women are facing during these COVID times?
Well, so the big, huge thing in my own life too, because I have two young daughters, I always joke that when we're looking back when we meet someone in 30 years, the question will be like, well, how old were your kids during the coronavirus if you had them? Because that's the big, balancing, being at home with the kids is so hard to juggle your responsibilities. And so, but something that a lot of people don't know is that the new federal legislation provides a sort of paid leave that can be taken intermittently if you're if you're a caregiver to a child whose school or daycare is closed or child care provider is unavailable because of the coronavirus, and you can take those intermittently. So I think my best piece of advice for people in that situation, which is definitely the main question that we get and that I think a lot of people are facing, or that moms are facing and dads, is if you request this type of leave, you can't be penalized for it. And that's a lot of the times this sort of protecting your rights in a political way. I often use the imagery of like the fist in the velvet glove. Requesting leave can be a great form of that. And something that everyone should know is retaliation is its own claim. So if you assert your rights, or if you make a claim of gender discrimination or racial discrimination or any kind of bad behavior based on a protected class, and your employer then mistreats you and retaliates against you for making the claim, you now have another claim, even if your original claim was questionable, as long as it was made in good faith. I'm not saying just go and wave around the discrimination flag and you'll be fine. But if someone, for example, is worried about balancing their responsibilities with work and childcare, I would say be proactive and come and talk to your employer about it and say, I want to do a good job, but as you know, I'm home with my kids. Here's these options available. And the more you make it explicit, I think from a legal standpoint, the harder it is for them to turn around and say, oh, well, you're underperforming, because you've raised these issues, you've gotten them out into the open.
So can you just explain that? So I don't have children, but if I had 2 kids at home, and is there leave that's covered by the government? They pay for my leave, or is the employer expected to pay for my leave?
So it's in the form of payroll tax credits for the employer. So for example, I have a sick employee. And so I had an employee who took 2 weeks. There's the new federal legislation includes sick leave provisions and then caregiving provisions. They rushed everything through so fast, and like everything's really sloppy. So there's way more and better protections for caregivers than for people who get sick themselves. But if you get sick yourself, for example, you have 2 weeks fully paid sick leave at your 100% rate. And what happens is, when I ran payroll, I clicked a little button saying so-and-so is on paid leave, and then I got a tax credit in that very same payroll for the amount of that person's paycheck.
That's so
interesting. So it's
clarify. So the employer is not out of pocket. That's the
exactly. That's why I think to me this seems underused, because with the caregiver provision, you can't use it if you can telework and care for a kid, then you can't use it. But you can use it intermittently. So you could say, okay, well, I could telework 4 hours a day, but not 8 hours a day, get paid as per usual for the 4 hours, and then get the credits, which is up to 60%, 67%, or 2/3 of your pay for the other half. Anyway, I didn't mean to, I'm like getting into the nitty gritty more than I meant to, but my point is, like, get it out into the open. And I think be explicit about it, come forward with your concerns so that you're using it, more of a shield, not like a sword rather than a shield, but.
I think that nitty gritty is so interesting as well, because I think a lot of, you mentioned you're an employer, I'm an employer, and I think, employers have got a lot going on too. And so I think if we can really empower the community members of PepTalkHer to understand the provisions available, that's very valuable for when they have to have that conversation with their boss, or maybe they can advise a friend who feels bad.
Yeah.
Weeks off because they've got COVID. I think this is really, really valuable and very interesting. What about if someone's on maternity leave while all of this is going on? Is there any coverage available for them?
There's no special rules at this moment, other than just the regular, you can't be penalized for being on maternity leave, you can't be treated differently for being on maternity leave. I did want to make one other point that applies to maternity leave, but also generally, which is a lot of people have questions, and especially, pregnant people and new parents are especially worried about their health and their safety in terms of going into the workplace. Lots of people say, I'm scared to go in, which I'm immunocompromised, or my partner is immunocompromised. Get a doctor's note. That's my other big piece of advice to everyone. If you have concerns.
Interesting.
Yes, and so the state, New York State New York State also has expanded leave laws. If anyone, there's lots of great resources. My website, Crumiller.com, has a big resource center. We also, if anyone has questions, we set up a hotline, an email hotline system. If anyone wants to email COVID@Crumiller.com, we have a team distributing answers. But also A Better Balance and the Gender Equality Law Center are operating hotlines, and they have tons of really active information. But New York State paid family has new expanded paid family leave and sick and family leave that applies to anyone who was advised to quarantine, for example. And it's you have to get certification from the health department, but you can get started right away with a doctor letter, and you just submit your doctor letter to the health department. A letter from your doctor is going to go probably further. We've been offering to write letters for people for free who are, in unsafe situations. But we always say, first go get the doctor's letter, because that's the factual evidence that you need. You can't, if you're just a rando who's I'm scared to go into work, that's it. That's not a reason not to go in.
And I think what you're saying that applies during COVID in terms of getting the documentation, correct me if I'm wrong, Susan, that is so important during any workplace situation that may or may not turn dramatic. So if you think you have been sacked while pregnant, if you think that you're being discriminated against, if you're part of a protected class and you feel that you're being treated differently, document everything, put everything in writing, make sure, is that right, Susan? Or what are the top things that women can do who are worried?
That's the top thing. You nailed it. That's the top thing. Document everything, and just make the conversation explicit, even though it's uncomfortable. Say, I really, I know that you guys would never treat me differently just because I'm on maternity leave, but I'm just making sure that we're all on the same page.
Similarly, just saying if there's layoffs and if you feel like maybe you're going to be treated differently because you have kids, you could say something like, I just want to be very clear and make sure that I'm not going to be treated differently just because I'm caring for 3 children at home.
Yes, 100%. And for a gender discrimination claim, for a retaliation claim, a lot of the times it hinges on, did you say anything? It's much harder to come back later and say, I think I was mistreated and then they treated me worse. If you come out and say, but I'm pregnant, I just want, or whatever, make it explicit, it bolsters your case, and more importantly, it's proactive, in that they will be more hesitant to take negative action against you once you vocalize these concerns, or they should be.
Yeah.
If not, call us, we'll sue them.
Absolutely. So I'm going to share that email with everyone. It's COVID@Crumiller, which is CRUMILLER.com.
Yes.
This has been so valuable. We're going to put the recording on our Instagram Live. We're going to put it on our YouTube. I'm going to share it on my LinkedIn. So valuable. Really great information for everyone, but particularly for women right now. How can people reach you if they have more confidential questions?
They can email me, Susan@Crumiller.com. They can email the COVID. I'll get everything. COVID@Crumiller, Susan@Crumiller. They can call our main number. It's on my website, Crumiller.com.
We're really grateful that you could spend this time with us today on today's Power Pep Talk. Super interesting. Document everything, get a doctor's note, and make sure your employer understands the provisions and the tax rebates that are available to them. We look forward to having another conversation very soon. We're going to have a lot of questions through after this. I can feel it. So I'm sure we'll be talking very soon. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you.
Bye.